Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.
ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰ ਫਿਰ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ Ymedia ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। Ymedia ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੈਂ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੱਸ ਦਈਏ ਕਿ ਯੂਐਸ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਡੋਨਲਡ ਟਰੰਪ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰ ਫਿਰ ਡੈਡਲਾਈਨ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਡ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ। ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਡੈਡਲਾਈਨ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਈਰਾਨ ਨੂੰ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਹੁਣ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਰੀਸੈਂਟਲੀ ਫਿਰ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਡ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ। ਫਰਾਈਡੇ ਦੀ ਡੈਡਲਾਈਨ ਸੀਗੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ 10 ਦਿਨ ਦੀ ਡੈਡਲਾਈਨ ਹੋਰ ਦੇ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਸੋ 10 ਦਿਨ ਹੋਰ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਮਿਲ ਗਈ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ। ਇਸ ਦਰਮਿਆਨ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰ ਦਈਏ ਕਿ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਯੂਐਸ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਡੋਨਲਡ ਟਰੰਪ ਨੇ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਇਹ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਕੁਝ ਆਇਲ ਟੈਂਕਰਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਈਰਾਨ ਨੇ ਇਜਾਜ਼ਤ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਹੈ। ਦੈਟ ਇਜ਼ ਪ੍ਰੀਸਾਈਜ਼ਲੀ ਦ ਰੀਜ਼ਨ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਇਸ ਡੈਡਲਾਈਨ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਡ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਖੈਰ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਕੀ ਇਹ ਜੰਗ ਰੁਕ ਸਕੇਗੀ? ਸਭ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਬੜਾ ਅਹਿਮ ਸਵਾਲ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੰਗ ਕਦੋਂ ਰੁਕੇਗੀ। ਹੁਣ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ ਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੂਡ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਹਟਣ ਦਾ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ। ਇਜ਼ਰਾਈਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹ ਹਜੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਯੈਸ, ਉਹ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਆਪਣੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਟ੍ਰਾਈਕਸ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਇਸੇ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜਾਰੀ ਰੱਖਣਗੇ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਆਬਜੈਕਟਿਵਸ ਹਜੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏ। ਹੁਣ ਦੂਸਰੀ ਤਰਫ ਈਰਾਨ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ। ਔਰ ਜੋ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨਸ ਰੱਖੀਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਖਤਮ ਕਰਨ ਦੀਆਂ, ਯੂਐਸ ਦੀ ਤਰਫੋਂ 15 ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨਸ ਰੱਖੀਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀ, ਈਰਾਨ ਦੀ ਤਰਫੋਂ 5। ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਡਿਟੇਲ 'ਚ ਐਕਸਪਲੇਨ ਕਰ ਹੀ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹੋ। ਉਹ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨਸ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਦੂਰ ਨੇ। ਉਹ ਆਈ ਡੋਂਟ ਥਿੰਕ ਸੋ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨਸ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਮੀਟ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਜਾ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਈਰਾਨ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਕੰਪਲੀਟਲੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਰੈਂਡਰ ਕਰ ਦਿਓ, ਨਿਊਕਲੀਅਰ ਵੈਪਨ ਕਦੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਾਓਗੇ, ਗਰੰਟੀ ਕਰੋ। ਈਰਾਨ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨਸ ਐਸੀਆਂ ਰੱਖ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਜੋ ਸਾਡਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਹੋਇਆ, ਡੈਮੇਜ ਹੋਇਆ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੂਰੀ ਭਰਪਾਈ ਕਰੋ। ਸੋ ਆਈ ਡੋਂਟ, ਉਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਦੂਰ ਨੇ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨਸ। ਮੀਡੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਸੀਗੀ ਕਿ ਟਰਕੀ, ਇਜਿਪਟ, ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਦੇਰ ਆਫਰਿੰਗ ਮੀਡੀਏਸ਼ਨ। ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਦਾ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਦਾਵਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਚਾਈਨਾ ਵੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਇਸਲਾਮਾਬਾਦ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ 'ਚ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ, ਕੋਈ ਮੀਡੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ। ਨਾਮ ਬੜੇ ਆਏ ਸੀਗੇ ਕਿ JD Vance, ਸਟੀਵ ਵਿਟਕੋਫ, ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਜਾ ਕੇ, ਜੈਰਡ ਕੁਸ਼ਨਰ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਨਾਮ ਆ ਰਿਹਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਜੀ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੇ ਲੋਕ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਇਸਲਾਮਾਬਾਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਪਰ ਸਵਾਲ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਸਿਕਿਉਰਿਟੀ ਕੰਸਰਨ ਵੀ ਸੀਗੇ। ਖੈਰ, ਹਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਐਸੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਨਜ਼ਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਰਹੀ। ਔਰ ਇਸ ਦਰਮਿਆਨ ਆਮ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਇੱਕ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕੋਨੇ 'ਚ ਬੈਠੇ ਹੋ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਚ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੈਸ ਸਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਸਿਸ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਫਲਕਚੁਏਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਕਦੇ 15 ਸੈਂਟਸ ਡਾਊਨ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਕਦੇ 6 ਸੈਂਟਸ ਡਾਊਨ ਨੇ, ਕਦੇ 10 ਸੈਂਟਸ ਉੱਪਰ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ। ਉਹਦਾ ਕਾਰਨ ਹੈ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਗਲੋਬਲ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਇਲ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਸਿਸ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਫਲਕਚੁਏਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਕਦੇ $119 ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਪਰ ਬੈਰਲ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਕਦੇ 100, ਕਦੇ 90। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਫਲਕਚੁਏਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ। ਉਹਦਾ ਅਸਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਪੰਪ 'ਤੇ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ। ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਬੜੀ ਵਾਰ ਜ਼ਿਕਰ ਕਰ ਹੀ ਚੁੱਕੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਇਹਦਾ ਕੀ ਕਾਰਨ ਹੈ। ਖੈਰ, ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ਾਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਜਾ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਜੰਗ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਖਤਮ ਹੋਏ, ਬਟ ਦ ਬਿਗ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਸਟਿਲ ਰਿਮੇਨਸ ਅਨਆਂਸਰਡ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜੰਗ ਹੈ ਇਹ ਕਦੋਂ ਖਤਮ ਹੋਏਗੀ। ਇਸ ਤੋਂ ਇਲਾਵਾ ਗਲੋਬਲ ਲੈਵਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇਹਦਾ ਕੀ ਰਿਐਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹਦੀ ਮੈਂ ਡਿਟੇਲ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ। ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ, ਇੰਡੀਆ, ਚਾਈਨਾ, ਸਾਡੇ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ 'ਤੇ ਕੀ ਇੰਪੈਕਟ ਹੈ। G7 ਲੀਡਰਸ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਫੋਰਨ ਅਫੇਅਰਸ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਨੀਤਾ ਆਨੰਦ ਵੀ ਮੌਜੂਦ ਸੀਗੇ। G7 ਨੇ ਮੰਗ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜਲਦੀ ਤੋਂ ਜਲਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜੰਗ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਖਤਮ ਕਰ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਜਾਏ। ਸਿਵੀਲੀਅਨ ਕੈਜੂਅਲਟੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਉਹ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਵੱਧ ਰਹੀਆਂ, ਵਿਚ ਇਜ਼ ਵੈਰੀ ਅਨਫੋਰਚੂਨੇਟ, ਵੈਰੀ ਸੈਡ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਐਜ਼ ਵੈਲ ਇਨ ਈਰਾਨ ਕਿ ਸਿਵੀਲੀਅਨ ਕੈਜੂਅਲਟੀਜ਼ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ, ਐਂਡ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਵੀ ਇਹਦੀ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਹੀ ਹੋਈ ਸੀ। ਸੋ ਇਸ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਬੜੀ ਡਿਟੇਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ। ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ ਖਾਸ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹੈਗੇ ਹਾਂ। ਔਰ welcome to Ymedia Foreign Policy Report, and I have my colleague with me, and we will be discussing on Ymedia Foreign Policy Report. We have Ramona Singh ji with me. Ramona ji, a warm welcome on Ymedia once again. Welcome back. How are you?
Hello, nice to be here.
Yeah,
and it's a sad day to discuss the war. It's absolutely devastating.
Yeah, it's absolutely devastating. Just for our viewers' benefit, we'd like to tell you that yes, US President Donald Trump, he has once again extended the deadline for another 10 days. The initial deadline was Friday, but now he's extended for another 10 days. We'll talk about that, but for now there is no diplomatic breakthrough. It's just merely an extension of another 10 days, and will it last for 10 days? We don't know what will happen after 10 days. There's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of devastation. Israel seems to be carrying on with the strikes. I don't think so. Israel wants to let go this war, doesn't want to end the war as it seems right now. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We'll talk about that. What does the Gulf nations want? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, what do they want? There have been conflicting reports. Saudi Arabia, there are reports that they would want to carry on the war and they would want to weaken Iran, but there are other reports that there's lots at stake for Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and all those countries. They've been shielding missiles up until now. We'll talk about the impact at a global scale as far as the common person is concerned, whether you're in New York, LA, Toronto, Vancouver, London, England. I'm sure we are all feeling the pinch. Certainly, the oil prices have fluctuated from 119 barrels to 88, 87, $80 per barrel, and the results are clearly seen at the gas stations, not just in the Western world, but whether it's the gas cylinder lineup that we've seen in Bangladesh, Pakistan, India. A lot of people use gas cylinders over there for domestic purposes as well. So we've seen challenges there in that part of the globe as well. How is it going to affect China, Russia, Ukraine war? There's so many discussions on the table. And to carry on this discussion further, what's your initial take of all the current situation? Ramonaji, please.
This is a fluid situation that seems to be changing. It seems like, day by day and sometimes hour by hour when you have, Donald Trump at the helm of this, essentially initiating this war that started on February 28th. And he has, changed his mind a lot. First, it was, a regime change, right? And that was the first day that the Ayatollah of Iran, as well as the senior administration, were killed. And, first the rhetoric was there needs to be an administration change, the regime change. And then after that, the conversation shifted when he started to realize that the Strait of Hormuz is closed. Gas prices are going through the roof. You cannot do a regime change just by removing, the high administration and the Ayatollah, that there needs to be boots on the ground, which is now what we're talking about almost a month into this war. So it seems like the target is changing, the talking points are changing, and even to a point where you had, foreign ministers of Pakistan, it was that, put it on X, in a way mocking the administration, saying that so now the administration, Donald Trump's administration's goal is to open the Strait of Hormuz, which was already open prior to the war. So this moving target is happening, which goes to show that they didn't have a clear vision on what they wanted to do. They didn't have clear consultation. Of course, we know that the NATO countries have come online and said that they were not consulted before this war started. The allies were not consulted. This seems to have been something between Donald Trump, US, and Israel to be able to launch this war. And since then, it's proven to be a lot more difficult than what he had hoped it would be. He thought it was going to be like Venezuela, go in overnight, capture Maduro, put someone else in there, and carry on. And perhaps that is what he was told, because he did say that that's what he thought it would be. When it comes to Marco Rubio, very disappointing for Secretary of the State to, first of all, not have a bigger scope of things, not have a better handle of negotiations, because this is really his job at the end of the day. This was what he was tasked to do for this administration. And, within the first 24 hours coming out to say that, listen, we knew Israel was going to go ahead, and we were told that US would be a target. And so we thought, it would be safer to also target and hit with Israel, hit Iran at the same time. So, and that was, a rude awakening to hear the Secretary of State to say that, because essentially when you look at historic facts, Iran has never attacked a country without being provoked first. And now I'm not talking in a point of taking a side. I'm simply talking about when it comes to history and statistics today. So for Marco Rubio to say that, the U.S. had to go in because they had to defend themselves, because they were told they had the intelligence that the U.S. would be hit if Israel were to hit. So that's, that was the first flaw where you hear, well, that's not very consistent with what we've seen within that region. We know that the American people don't want forever wars. We know that the global community doesn't want forever wars. And now that the repercussions are happening when it hits home, it's hit home in many different countries, including here in Canada, where gas prices have gone through the roof. So there is a massive economic pressure. We are looking at recession. We are looking at the dollar dropping. We are looking at possibly inflation with interest rates going up. This is we're entering a new world if this carries on much further. Now, how much handle does President Trump have to be able to have negotiations with Iran, to be able to control what Israel may want to do? Because Israel does, say something opposite to the United States, where President Trump says there are negotiations, then you have Israel saying something else, that they're going to carry on the attacks. So how is this administration going to handle this? We can go point by point, but so far, this is what it looks like.
Yeah, and what I was looking at, if you start from Ukraine, if you look at the global map right now, I know there is a relative oasis of calm. If we look here, relative, I'm saying, if you look in countries like US and Canada and some other parts of the world, in India, China, maybe Japan, Australia. But if you look at the map starting from the Western world, Ukraine, Russia, full-scale, full-blown war. Then you move a little bit down south. Here there are strikes in Iraq. There is full-blown Israel, full-blown war. Saudi Arabia. Then you have Qatar, Bahrain, UAE, Jordan, Iran itself, and then of course there's war happening between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So almost I would say an area of 6,000 kilometers or even more. So many countries that are engulfed in this war, clearly a full-scale war. All these countries, from Pakistan to Ukraine, or the entire Middle East included, Russia included. So, of course, there's relatively peace in other countries, but the oil crisis is hitting those countries as well. So, there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of thought process in a common person, because there are many people who would fly through the Middle East. There are many flights who pass through these areas. So before we go into more discussion, I want to understand your thought process, because you've lived in Iran, you've lived in US, you're living in Canada, you lived in India, you lived in Europe as well. Your base was there in England. So you lived in many parts, you have connections all over the globe. What is the thought process? What's going through the mind of a common person? What is all about this global crisis?
The common person is scared because the world leaders, the people that have been elected to make decisions, they don't have a plan. And this is evident because day by day, as we said, the goalpost is changing about what was the point of this war, what is the objective, what do they want to do. I mean, when you look at the stats, right? So let's start with Iran. You have so far as the start of this war on February 28th, you have over 1,900 Iranian deaths. We're talking about women, children, everything in between. 24,000 people are injured, and there's that military losses. You have 15,000 targets that were struck. We're talking about 3.2 million people that have been displaced. So this is we've seen that with wars, that when wars start, people get misplaced. We've seen that in Ukraine. Now it's happening in Iran. We have, like you said, the energy crisis that's taking place, the shutdown of Strait of Hormuz. But when we talk about the casualties, when you look at the death tolls, and this is just a start, because what President Trump is talking about, what Israel's talking about, it's going to get a lot more devastating. And we have stats from the International Organization of Migration. They announced that 82,000 civilian buildings have been hit so far. 180,000 people have been, that have been affected within those civilian buildings. When it comes to casualties for the United States, it's about 13 to 15 U.S. members. People injured, about 200 for U.S. members. Israel, 19 have been killed. 5,400 Israelis are injured. When it comes to the Gulf states, it's 25 so far have been killed. And I can go through each state by state and let you know how many have been affected because of this war when it comes to, and Lebanon is another front. So far, you have 1,100 people killed, over 3,000 have been injured. And it just goes on from Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Cyprus. It just continues and continues. And this is just the beginning. If we're talking about boots on the ground, if we're talking about Karg Island is a strategic location where Trump has said he might want to capture it. Okay, you capture it. How are you going to hold it? this is growing. When you look at the numbers of how many have been deployed, you have 7,000 combat troops are in the Middle East, but now 10,000 more have been deployed. This is, and we're talking about another 50,000 perhaps would increase because of the conflict. We have heard from the NATO nations saying that they will support the United States after, of course, taking some time to assess the situation. They haven't said how they're going to assist. They put on a joint statement after Trump pretty much blasted NATO, saying you're not helping us out to open up the Strait of Hormuz. So I don't know if any administration right now knows what's going to happen. It seems like Israel in all of this has their mind made up about what their objectives are, what they're going after. And it seems like the rest of the world is trying to find some sort of a middle ground. I know from previous, President Trump did campaign on not having forever wars. He did campaign on, taking care of domestic issues for the United States, and he won on a lot of those campaign promises that now he's gone back on. So one would assume that President Trump doesn't want to escalate this war because he heavily campaigned on not having wars, specifically also in the Middle East. So I would imagine that he would like to have some sort of an agreement negotiation. They did put out the 15 points to Iran, and Iran has said that, that it's a big ask. So therefore, we don't really even know where the negotiations are. President Trump says that negotiations are going well. Iran says there's no negotiations. Israel says we're going to attack. Both countries are attacking each other, Iran to Israel, Israel to Iran. And it's just chaotic to understand what's going on. So I think the people who are not in those regions, who are not, devastated for their lives and wondering where to go and what to do. The rest of us who are in a better situation of being not in harm's way physically, we're all glued to the TV trying to understand what this all means and what's going to change.
Yeah. And the other question is, many people would want to know. And that's a question I'm also being asked as a group editor of Ymedia, when will this war end? Because if this war carries on, I think when I've been reading Financial Post and so many other newspapers, and on the financial side, I would assume if this war carries on for another 50 to 60 days, and you mentioned that in your last discussion as well, you were mentioning that the Iran would want the oil prices to go as high as $200. If simply the war carries on for another 60 days, I would assume it will go definitely 150, 175, or it could even touch $200 per barrel. So it's going to go, and the moment it crosses $150 per barrel, I think major challenges. There are already major energy challenges across the globe, so there will be major challenges. And here we're talking, it's not just the oil, it's not just the LPG, it's not just the gas, oil, or diesel. These are products used in so many wide areas that we will face challenges for a common person in terms of inflation and disruptions and so many other areas as well. When will this war end? There are some who are predicting maybe another 30 days this will end. There are others who are predicting this will go on for a longer time. We have the Soccer World Cup happening in US as well. So when you answer your question, I want to bring that point into discussion as well. And I'm sure such a major event, how would you have war on one side? Because in mid-June, we start the Soccer World Cup. US is one of the host countries. So can we see in mid-June war continuing and the Soccer World Cup happening simultaneously? Of course, Mexico and Canada are also the host countries. There are games in Vancouver, there are games in Toronto, but US taking the chunk of the Soccer World Cup. That's point number one. Second, I want you to discuss also, because there are midterm polls as well. So two major events, Soccer World Cup, midterm polls. So I think so, the timeline, these two important events, the timeline for war, there will be certain discussions. I'm sure Israel would want to go right till the end. But what do you have to say? When will this war end?
Well, that's the point. We don't know, because the talking points on what the purpose of this war was, why did it start, the objectives, how much time they're going to invest and how much military they're going to invest, how much manpower, all that's been changing. If you notice, from negotiations going from 48 hours to now 10 days. All that's changing, so it is very unknown how long this is going to go on for. Now, we know that because the Strait of Hormuz, it's not completely shut down. There is oil being sent to China and other places, not the same amount that was obviously going through on a daily basis. It's been reduced significantly. But we know that the port is there. Iran is looking at something of like a toll strategy where they would allow certain ships in and out. So they're looking at it a more strategic way as well, aside from just shutting it down. That's another point. Now, if President Trump cannot come to some sort of a negotiation with Iran on what he says are the 15 points, maybe he changes the 15 points, some of which are about, the 400 million, about the 10 bombs for uranium enrichment that Iran could do, which hasn't done yet, which is what the reports say. If they come to some sort of an agreement, then perhaps, and U.S. is able to somehow control Israel and all of this, from getting to refrain from continuing bombing and continuing their escalations, then maybe we'll get somewhere. But let's just say that the negotiations don't come to any fruition. The deadline, by April 6th doesn't get changed, doesn't get pushed forward. Then what we're looking at is if the United States goes in and decides to take Kharg Island, then we know Strait of Hormuz is definitely shut down, right? So right now, there's some shipments going out. It's still devastating to the global economy, and more specifically the local economy there. But then that would definitely shut it down. So that we're still affected, right? So Donald Trump's job as president of the United States is to make sure that the economy is running, right? He needs to make sure that gas is under $100 per barrel. And that's why he decided to, release the reserves. That's why he decided to remove the sanctions on Russian oil, as well as any oil tankers, Iranian ones that are already out there. He's removed those sanctions specifically to make sure the price of oil comes down. Our economies rely on cheap oil. This is something that we built. Capitalism relies on it when it comes to manufacturing. Everything we do. We're nowhere near about, from being independent off oil. This is how our world actually turns. So we're seeing that happen right now. And if he does take over Kharg Island, well, it's a matter of how long could he sustain that for without more troops coming in, without dedicating more manpower to the region. Then yes, it's a much, much longer war, because it's not a matter of I've captured it, we have it. Now you have to deploy more troops to be able to take care of that entire region. And we're talking about years to come. We're looking at something like what you've seen with the Russia-Ukraine war. That's the kind of level of war we're looking at. And then because that whole Strait of Hormuz supplies 20% of the world's oil, we're all going to be affected, right? So I can't see the path out unless you have some sort of mediation that happens between these two countries, and Israel is controlled in terms of not instigating further. Because in Israel, you have Bibi Netanyahu has said, listen, this was my 40-year dream coming true, right? He's been talking about Iran as being the biggest threat to Israel. He said this is his dream, 40 years in the making. It's coming true. So now for them to pull back, it'll be very hard to start a new war. We saw this last year in June, it was 12 days. And then from that, we saw what happened this year. If so there's a lot of moving parts. And now the question bears in mind, is the Trump administration able to handle this in terms of making negotiations, and also Trump not looking worse off than the Obama deal? Because he's always talked about how Obama made a bad deal with Iran. You agree or disagree, that is your personal opinion, but this president has always wanted to one up what Obama has done. So if he were to let Iran keep their uranium, give in to everything just to open up the Strait of Hormuz, which was already open before this war, then I don't know what kind of a deal he thinks he's making. And also, let's not forget, no matter what the deal is, his administration took out the Ayatollah, which was the supreme leader of Shia Islam, not just, and I want to really stress this point, Ayatollah Khamenei was not just the leader of a political party in Iran, or not just the leader of Iran, he was the supreme leader of Shia Islams. There is 250 million Shia Islams Muslims in the world. So there's that has to be dealt with at some point, and what the fallout or the repercussions from that is yet to see. And also, let's also keep in mind the current Ayatollah is Khamenei's son, who's now the current Ayatollah, and he lost his father, mother, wife, children in the attacks from United States and Israel. Is he going, and his new administration, going to come to the table and also negotiate with the United States and Israel? So it's a very moving thing. I don't think between you and I, we're going to figure this out today, because we have to see what these leaders are going to come up with and try to assess the best situation of make sense of what it is that they're doing. When it comes to, you said, soccer and the world of sports, maybe certain things will carry on because they need to change the channel on things. When it comes to affordability crisis, which is something that Prime Minister Mark Carney has campaigned on, and he's been at the job for about a year. This is something that Trump campaigned on to make life more affordable. Well, things are not going to be affordable. They weren't affordable before. This war will stress it even further and change the way we do business, the way we live, the way our economies run, if it does continue, even for another month. So when it comes to their promises, that's not going to be met, because less people care about what wars happening in different places and forever wars, and they care more about, am I able to afford my mortgage, my rent? Am I able to put food on the table? Am I able to pay for gas to go to work or to just do stuff? Am I able to afford basic necessities of life? Is what people are worried about. And if these leaders are not able to address those, and election is far away, then maybe, they will have sports events. They need to somehow entertain people or maybe distract from the cause. But we do know that even when it comes to Toronto, they have now a special unit in certain areas when it comes to tourist attractions and events for safety. We know that there's threats, terrorist threats. The United States has already had them for when it comes to, in retaliation of what happened in Iran, when it comes to California. So that's another aspect to take a look at what that means. And then also there's a question of your civil liberties, right? In time of war, we see that civil liberties are pushed aside, where we have to opt into a more of a police type of, I'm not going to say police state, but a lot of our civil liberties are given up. If you recall the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, when the wiretapings were happening in the United States, we're seeing that right now. We're going to start seeing a lot of that, where people are going to give up their civil liberties because they're going to say, well, there's a war. We saw that happen in COVID, right? You give up your civil liberties, you don't go here, you don't go there because you didn't get vaccinated. So this is part of how things are going, and that's a greater conversation we need to have about what the direction is, where things are going. But overall, it's a big fail. It's a big fail by our leaders not to understand what this means, where this is going. I mean, I'd love to hear more from our Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand. Please tell us, what is Canada going to do? Is Canada going to be co-opted into this because of the United States? What is our plan? It'd be really nice to hear from our leaders about, what we're going to do. So both you and I can sit here and talk about what they said, but in lieu of not having to know what their opinions are, what their next steps are, what they're doing, and how we're going to safeguard against all this, it's very hard.
Yeah. And since you were asking me what other countries can do, what is Canada going to do, and this is also very important because for Iran war, many of the allies of US, they haven't really participated. To begin with, whether it was Canada, one of the closest allies, Canada clearly said this, Prime Minister Mark Carney, he clearly said this, we were not asked. I was at an event. I was sitting right next to our Defense Minister David McGuinty, and he also mentioned this thing that Canada was not asked. I had heard it before earlier as well, but there at this event as well, he mentioned this. Canada's Defense Minister David McGuinty, he clearly mentioned this, that we were not asked. We are not going to be part of this war. So Canada is militarily at least not in the war. Neither is Germany, England, Spain, Italy. The G7, I'll show you a picture from the G7 foreign ministers. There was a meeting there as well. They've clearly said this, that they do not want this. They want at least the Strait of Hormuz. So here I'm showing you. These are the foreign affairs minister for G7. There are other foreign ministers as well, other than G7 as well. So these foreign ministers are all appealing that what, we want a free navigation as far as Strait of Hormuz is concerned, as Iran continues to throttle the key waterway. This was a major statement issued. This meeting happened in France. G7 foreign ministers clearly said an immediate stop of attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. So not only the US close allies, they didn't join the war, but G7 ministers, they're issuing a joint statement to immediately stop the attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure. That's what they're saying, because President Trump had threatened to strike Iran's energy infrastructure if Iran won't open this Strait of Hormuz, and the initial deadline was on Friday, but we all know the self-imposed deadline has been now pushed further to April 6th. April 6th is the new deadline. So all these allies, they've clearly expressing their concerns, and they're saying, yes, they're open to support in any way, and they've underscored the importance of this issue, as you were mentioning earlier as well, that how this is affecting the common man, and they're saying, let's stop the, whether it's Iran or other areas, the count is increasing by the minute, and we'll know the exact count, how many people have lost their lives. And you shared a story in a previous segment, how you had to leave Iran, you and your family member, and thousands had to leave Iran during the earlier conflict in 80s. But here we are once again, thousands are displaced right now from the, and if you look at the countries that are in conflict right now, and I like to mention once again at the bottom of our screen, let's look at the countries again. All these countries, multiple countries are in conflict right now, from Ukraine to Russia to Jordan to UAE to Israel. US is also in conflict right now. Of course, US citizens in that particular area, at least, they must be quite concerned. And then, Russia, Ukraine, and then on this side, all the Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Pakistan and Afghanistan are fighting against each other in a full-blown war right now. They're targeting the civilians as well. So I hope that when G7 is making a statement, they're particularly talking about this conflict between US, Israel and Iran. But I hope we should all talk about how we can stop the conflict, Russia versus Ukraine, Pakistan versus Afghanistan, and this entire Middle East is in crisis right now. I want your take. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you could say you were not consulted, and they weren't, right? They weren't consulted when this started on February 28th. We're talking about, the other NATO countries, other G7 countries. Okay, they were not consulted, but that was early talking points in March. As things are progressing and it looks like it's going to escalate, no signs is showing that's going to de-escalate. Can we agree on that? So far, all the signs are showing that this is looking to escalate as you have troops being sent to the region, and it's kind of like a pressure tactic by President Trump. Like, if they don't come to terms, here's my troops. They're approaching day by day, right? So this is a pressure. Now, will that work with Iranians? I don't know. Is that going to work? I don't know, because right now it appears that Iran has the upper hand by being able to close the Strait of Hormuz and having the global pressure on the United States and Israel, right? So there's that. So now coming up with a joint statement for all those foreign affairs ministers and all those leaders of those nations of NATO and G7, that's great. But then what if this escalates? I'd like to hear from them, because they must be able to have some sort of a, 5-step plan, 10-step plan. If this happens and this, if this, right? So at some point they need to come forward before this deadline on April 6th and tell us what happens if this war escalates. If they don't come to an agreement and the troops go in, the American troops, boots on the ground, and it's not going to just be 1,000, it's going to be added. It's going to be tens of thousands which are going to be added. What is Canada's role in it? How is that going to affect Europe? Because this obviously still affects Europe. When Europe gets affected, then Canada gets pulled in because those are our allies. So this is all very serious things. And can any of those countries, do they have any ability to talk to Trump? Do they have any ability to talk to Israel? Right? Because this is what we want. Don't we want NATO nations mediating? Don't we want them having some sort of a line of communication to the White House and to Israel? Don't we want that to be able to figure that part out at least? So I'm very interested to know what's going to happen. I know what happened yesterday. I'm wondering what's going to happen tomorrow. And this is the expectations of people we elect. We want them to tell us what's going to happen tomorrow. We already know what happened yesterday. We lived through it. And so that's the devastating point of where this could go. What was your other question that you had asked?
Yeah, I mean the G7 ministers, they made a statement as you were discussing that they want an immediate stop to this war. U.S. President Donald Trump, he's questioned NATO. He was not very happy that many of the U.S. allies they didn't join the war. U.S. President Donald Trump was expecting some sort of support. Of course, he later said, no, we don't need any support. But I'm sure U.S. And maybe Israel would also want, Canada refused it, England refused, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, they all didn't join the war. So now here they are, they want to stop the attacks immediately. And you see the number of countries which are, there are civilian challenges. So we're talking about, the statement has been issued by G7, stop attacking the civilians immediately. But would Trump listen? Because at the end of the day, I would say, if there is one person who holds the power, I'm sure Israel also holds a card. Then you have Iran would want to agree to a ceasefire. But I think the buck stops at President Trump's desk. So will Trump listen? Will Israel listen? Will Iran listen to G7 foreign ministers? These are all US allies, and many of these countries have good relationship with Israel as well. They want to stop immediate attacks on the civilians and civilian infrastructure as well. Please.
Yeah, I mean, that's their talking point, right? Nobody wants to have civilians killed. Nobody wants this war. The point is, when the Strait of Hormuz was closed and Trump realized, oh, I just picked a war I can't see an end to, and it looks like the country I picked a war with has an upper hand because it controls where 1/5 of the global oil comes from, where 20% of the oil comes from, and it's going to affect the countries that are also then going to go back to it and say, hey, what's going on? It's going to affect the whole GCC regions, when it comes to all the places where the United States has allies, such as Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, where they have, their bases in Iraq and so on and forth. So it looks like they didn't really think that through. So when he asked for help now, because now it went from I'm going to do a regime change to now I need help to open up the Strait of Hormuz because we need oil. Well, it is a suicide mission, right? And the first talking point for any of those countries is going to be like, well, we didn't start it, so we can't go in because it is a suicide mission. So now imagine now him sending troops to take over Karg Island is going to be even a bigger suicide mission. And when I say suicide mission, I don't mean it lightly. You're putting boots on the ground in a country that has hills, valleys, mountains. They're heavily armed. They're saying they have 1 million soldiers. We know this about them. That's why the region, as the United States, have army bases for protection against Iran. This is not new. This isn't like yesterday. They didn't just develop this within the last week. This is something that's known for a very long time about Iran and their capabilities. And at the same time, now you have emboldened Russia to sell their oil, which immediately affects Ukraine. So the fallout of this is that other countries have to remilitarize, right? You have Saudi Arabia. What did they just bought $142 billion package the United States just sold to Saudi Arabia of arms. All these countries around the region, the GCC countries, are now buying arms. They're arming up. Then you have South Korea that needs to arm up because they're only a throw distance well is like kilometers away from North Korea. Then you have Japan that gets its oil from that region, but now has to worry about China. You have Taiwan that's saying, wait a minute, if this war is going to go on, what does that mean with us with China? So this conflict could actually grow even larger, and Russia is now able to sell its resources in terms of oil and to be able to fund the war even further. So any way you look at this strategically, it's a big mess. And that's why, the biggest scare when you say what is the scare of people is they don't want this to turn into World War III, where you then, because Saudi Arabia said, hey, we're going to attack, because Israel attacks Iran, and Iran attacks Israel. Then you have U.S., attacking Iran. Then Iran comes and attacks its neighbors when it comes to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman. And now Saudi's saying, well, we're going to retaliate. And if Saudi now has bought arms, and same with the other GCC countries, and if they start retaliating, then of course, you can't have G7 foreign ministers taking a great picture together saying, we want diplomacy. We're past that. And that could happen within, by April 6th, if things are not agreed upon, right? So this is about, I'd love to hear a plan about where will the G7 states, what they'll do if we go into a situation where Saudi Arabia does retaliate to protect itself, and same with the other countries, this grows in that region more significantly. I'd love to hear what we're going to do. What is our plan? Are we going to then have to send troops? Because you can't go with the talking points. We didn't know about this because times have changed, right? That was regime change. Now something else, right? The talking points are changing as the objective is changing. And the sad thing is it's the military people. It's the people in the army and the Marines who've signed up. They're the ones who have to go into combat and lose lives. That's the sad part in all of this. And as soon as they get there, and if that continues on all sides from the countries that are being invaded, the countries that are going to be pulled into it, the talking points are going to change because the politicians are going to have to try to tell people something. And yeah, in those cases, you need to have entertainment, you need to have movies, you need to have music, just to entertain people, to distract them from the truth of what's going on. So that's unfortunately the way the world is working.
Ymedia Group, the fastest growing media group in North America.